Welcome to another wonderful episode of the Getting Defensive podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Hello, Jerry. Good evening. It's always like, where's Jerry? And I always look at your background to figure out where you're at.
Yes,
Bopping
today.
around.
I'm down in Florida today.
Well, we have another amazing guest for hopefully amazing. We think he's going to be amazing.
Yeah,
If not, we just won't air the show.
that's true. But before you introduce our guest, we do want to say that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employers, even those of us who are not currently employed. So there you go.
True. Someday we'll just record that as a bumper and stick it automatically on the front of our shows, but not today.
Today's not the day.
Anyway, to introduce our guest, we have Mr. Joe Gray, who we've known for a long time. And Joe has a long and impressive resume. As I was pulling together, we asked our guests for their intro, and I was like, that's not good enough. So I went and trolled his LinkedIn and his other open source intelligence sources, and I pulled together some stuff. And here is Joe Gray in a nutshell, and you can tell me what I get wrong, Joe. All right. So he started his career in the U.S. Navy submarine service, serving at sea in subs, which that alone can probably tell you how crazy he is, because that takes a special kind of something to do, and much respect for that. From there, his career took him to many different roles in cybersecurity, from system administration, security consulting, pen testing, security architecture, amongst others. He's a well-known public speaker and author, best known for his work in open source intelligence, threat intelligence, and social engineering. He's spoken at countless security cons, quoted in many publications, author of the book Practical Security Engineering for No Start Press. He's also the co-organizer of the B-Sides Knoxville Security Conference, founder of OSINT, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, a training company focused on OSINT and social engineering awareness. He's also created the popular OSINT tools Decepticon Bot and WikiLeaker. He's won multiple capture the flag competitions, including the inaugural DarbyCon Social Engineering CTF, amongst others, placed highly at various cons in their contests like DEF CON. Many other things, but with that, I will say, please welcome Joe to the show. And Joe?
The book is Practical Social Engineering, not Practical Security Engineering.
I even wrote social and I read security.
It's okay that security is on your mind. I mean,
it's hardwired into his brain.
It's even in my notes as social, and I just read it as security.
We're InfoSec people. We struggle to be social. It's okay.
It's true. I just have an aversion to socialness, and I can't even read the word. Practical social.
I was social once, and it was terrible.
I'm so sorry. There are support groups we can hook you up with.
I could probably use some group therapy.
And just to mention, you've had a lot of different roles, but right now you're actually in between roles. And is it anything we're talking about in terms of like next roles?
I have a contingent offer right now. The background check is taking quite a while. There's some hiccups with getting the appropriate documentation from a former employer. But beyond that, I mean, right now I'm doing freelance gigs, OSINT, social engineering, bespoke, custom, private trainings if necessary. And then I'm just enjoying not working, but at the same time, I'm about to drive myself mad from not working.
I understand completely. Well, hey, welcome. Appreciate you being on the show. This is kind of a new format for us, as I mentioned, and we're still getting our legs under us. But we've had a lot of people ask, "Hey, when would you guys have other people on the show?" So we came up with this format, and would love to talk to you about all the cool work you do and what people could learn from some of the amazing things you're doing. And Jerry, if you want to kick us off with our initial questions, we'll go from there.
Very curious how you got your start in social engineering.
I don't meet strangers. I mean, I have that gift of gab, and kind of in a past life, I was on a team that was actually in two past lives. I've been on teams that have been um, managed by lawyers. One of them, the manager, he kind of liked to cross examine people. He would ask the same question about three different ways, and that just kind of clicked in that it's not what you ask, but it's how you ask it. And that's something that I say very heavily in OSINT things and all types of intelligence things. But realistically, if you think of social engineering as human intelligence, it really is. So it's just another intelligence form. So, something that I
Mhm.
like to do in the rare occasions that I do public speaking, I've kind of really stepped back from that. But something I like to do in those rare occasions would be ask an audience member, hey, what was your mom's name before she was married? Because I know that the word
Hmm.
maiden automatically sets off a trigger, it sets off an alarm and it gets defenses up. But if you just slide into a conversation, hey, what was your mom's name before she was married? Some people are going to pick up on it, but many people aren't. So, things like that. And then I I was working on a doctorate that I didn't finish, and the year was about 2016. Ransomware was all the rage. We had Locky. I was listening to the Defensive Security podcast and hearing about the exploit kits and the automatic phishing it did. And I went to my advisor, and they said, "You need to identify a problem that's real in your industry right now." And I said, "Well, um, this degree is in cyber, so therefore ransomware." And they're like, "Cool, see how much scholarly content you can find on ransomware." Yeah, that was uh, pretty close to a big fat zero. There was a little bit, but not much, because it's still new. This was pre WannaCry, so there
Yeah.
hadn't been a lot of academic stuff. And then I took the idea of you're not trying to boil the ocean, you're trying to find that one pebble of sand and get to know it intimately. So I broke it down. Okay, this is ransomware. This is what it does. Okay, how does it spread? It spreads from exploit kits. This exploit kit does automatic phishing. Phishing is what? Social engineering. Social engineering is directly tied to psychology. So with that near shoulder dislocation of a stretch, I got my advisor to say, hey, yeah, you can use psychology and sociology journals as part of your dissertation. So I had done some formal, research, wrote some papers on it, and then I was working as a consultant, and we were all going to DerbyCon, and someone's like, "Hey, dude, you should totally do the social engineering CTF." I was like, I don't know, and I signed up. I did it in the OSINT phase. I got second place, which back then I didn't even call it OSINT. I just called it Google Foo. I got
Hmm.
second place in that portion, and then when I got my time in the booth, because the company was based in the Louisville, Kentucky area, I brought my southern accent out, talked a little bit slower, built a little bit of rapport, and I got them telling me all kinds of stuff. And after that, I went back to the office, and they're like, "Oh, you're good at social engineering? Oh, cool. Here's a list of phone numbers to call." So I got thrust into it, and then I just started developing, kind of innovative ways to go about doing things, getting good clones of websites that I could use, and then just figuring out how to piece things together and try to do it without detection. I've
Yeah.
spent a lot of time figuring out how SPF, DKIM, and DMARC records work, um, so that I can bypass that check. I've never been a fan of spoofing. I'm a bigger fan of squatting on a domain and going
Hmm.
with those three email, reputation. I know they're technically security, but they're more for reputation protocols, that kind of stuff. And then just working things through. Like whenever I would do a phishing engagement, I wouldn't even send 1,000 emails at once. I would send irregular numbers of like 10 to 17 at a time. That way you're not sitting, this was pre-apocalyptic days, pre-pandemic when people still had to go to an office. That way you're not sitting in the office and everybody's got their computer speakers turned up and you hear the email notification sound that everybody just received the same email.
Sure.
It's the little
Makes
things.
sense. Yeah, no, I mean, Jerry and I have talked about this a lot over the years, and I personally believe, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Of social engineering is usually some sort of
It totally
psychological
is.
attack, and I do feel strongly that we have this tendency in the industry to sort of look at someone who has been a victim of some sort of social engineering as a mental failing or a lack of intelligence or a lack of awareness. And my belief has been that almost anybody could, given the right circumstances and the right trigger and the right motivation, fall for some sort of social engineering attack. I'm not to get on my soapbox, but I really do feel like this is, our motivators and our psychology is such that they can be manipulated based on stressors and motivators and whatever else. And, so it's an incredibly powerful technique that I think some people dismiss as, that's just, people just being dumb and not thinking through what they're doing. And I just don't feel that's true. And I mean, you have far more practical real world experience than I do. So please tell me if I'm like being too kind to the people who fall
Actually, let's
victim of
start that
this.
with a poll. Who here has fallen victim, between the three of us, who has fallen victim to a fish at some point in your life?
Today. No, not
So,
today.
In the last 5 minutes.
I mean, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
I convinced you two to let me on your show. So
That's,
obviously,
that's why
both of
I'm
you.
here
that's true.
podcasting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We did no authentication, authorization, or any confirmation that this is Joe Gray. And besides, a name like Joe Gray, is that real?
I
How could
never
it be
thought
real?
about that, but I've actually had former coworkers be like, "Do you work for the CIA? Is that a burner name?" It's like, no, it really isn't. But no, realistically, everybody can fall victim to it. Everybody has that trigger,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
depending on the level of persistence, depending on the level of sophistication of the adversary that's doing the attack, um, the amount of time they spend doing the OSINT, the information gathering ahead of time to understand. Like, I just did an engagement on an international company. It wasn't a social engineering engagement. It was attack surface monitoring. So I was seeing what the attack surface
Hmm.
was for them. And, spoiler alert, I didn't use Nmap. But one thing I did
Hmm.
learn was their CISO likes to run 10-kilometer races and marathons. And then I saw their
Mm.
CISO on LinkedIn talking about OSINT, so I made sure to include his latest run score in my report. So, something of that nature. If I were
Yeah.
doing a social engineering engagement and I were more local, I would try to go running in the locations that this guy is in to try to get a feel for him, to understand, who he is, to try to build that rapport. But anybody can be susceptible to it. Anybody can. We all have that one thing. We've all received that text message claiming to be our financial institution, and sometimes they actually do get it right. And you're like, oh, and then you happen to see it's .info, and it's like, oh, never mind. But like the number of times I've almost jumped through those hoops myself, and I've just had to slow down a second. They're trying, the adversaries that do this, they do sit around and scheme. That's basically what they're doing. They are professional con artists. If I'm doing social engineering, I'm acting as a professional con artist. Depending on what my client wants, the level of sophistication and persistence they want, I will go off and do things like, if they're just now starting a program, no, I'm not going to do like HTML smuggling or all this fancy stuff. No, I'm just going to try something simple and go with that. But at the end of the day, the most dangerous phrase in social engineering is, "Can you please help me?" And humans want to be helpful. And if you know that someone works in accounting and you know that they have a soft spot for people to get, say, their W-2s or something, or their first and last
Sure.
pay stub, something to that effect, if you know they have a soft spot for it and you're acting as a social engineer and you can play to those emotions and pull those strings, every defensive mechanism possible could be defeated. And that's why, like, my philosophy is people are going to fail. And whenever I was running a training program at my last position, we set it up in such a way that we had the bucket of most employees and then we had the sensitive employees. Sensitive employees being finance, accounting, the executives, and I actually put InfoSec in there. My manager was a little
Hmm.
bit irritated with me because that meant that we got fished more frequently. But if someone
Yeah.
out of the other bucket failed, they would get moved to the sensitive employee bucket for 3 or 6 months and get the remedial training. And is there a point of no return for some employees? Yeah. Some people are going to click it or die. But as technologists, that is our job to identify and understand that risk. And, both of you know me well enough to know I'm not a big fan of solving problems solely via the use of technology. But sometimes there
Hmm.
are users and there are circumstances where it's like we need to have more technical controls around this group of users because they are more susceptible to click on these things. So instead of saying all users are stupid, no users are stupid. I mean, generally speaking, if you have a user in your organization that you feel is stupid, if say they work in accounting, well, let's see how stupid you think they are when they don't pay you on time.
Right. Yeah. Their job is important or they wouldn't be
Exactly.
there.
And,
Right.
I don't expect Barbara in accounting or Michael in HR to be, up to date on the latest trend on what insert bear here is doing. I don't expect them to be able to parrot off MITRE ATT&CK or tell me about the disarm framework or something like that. I expect them to tell me about auditing principles, HR regulations, and ensuring that I am paid on time. As long as those conditions are met,
Right.
I understand there's a lot more to accounting, finance, and HR than that. But in the scope of what affects me, as long as they are good at that, I give them a thumbs up.
Yeah. Makes sense. And I imagine like this world's getting a lot harder with all the really interesting advances in deepfakes and voice simulation and face simulation and all this sort of stuff that we're seeing right now. Have you seen much of that in your work, or has that come into play in the real world yet?
It is front and center. Um, I've not
Yeah.
seen it so much on the defensive perspective professionally, but that's mostly because I've been unemployed for a few months. Um,
Mhm.
and the organization I was at wasn't quite a prime target for that just yet, but organizations can be. And something I was advocating in my previous role very heavily is for organizations to set up an authentication word or a specific term that
Mhm.
is held internally so that if you receive a phone call from the CISO, the CEO, or your manager saying, I need you to do this, I need you to go buy Amazon gift cards at 10:30 on a Saturday. If they
Of
know the
course.
magic word, cool. I'm probably still not going to do it, but to put that additional hurdle in there. So if you have
Yeah.
like a special term for employees, like using Disney and Walmart as examples, Disney calls their employees cast members, Walmart calls their employees associates. Those are not the terms that I would use. I would have a different term,
Hmm.
and honestly, I would probably rotate it periodically and just keep it like relatively quiet. If you've got the capability, set up a DNS entry that would be like security.word and you go to it and it's nothing but an HTML page with the word on it. I mean, out of band communication, something of that
Interesting.
nature, just to have that validation because, I've seen it demonstrated where for under $20, you can take someone who had, you only need like 30 seconds of audio to be able to clone someone's voice. The more time, the merrier, so that you can find those nuances. You can figure out which filler words they use. You can kind of get a better idea of the tempo they use. But doing that for under 20 bucks, yeah. And, when you talk about a nation state that has, I don't want to say an unlimited budget, but a near unlimited budget, it gets
Hmm.
bad. And I have been observing that not so much in the infosec space, but in the information warfare space. I have been observing a lot of disinformative videos floating around the socials, some being Trump claiming he's going to do this or that, some uh, being Vice President Harris claiming she's going to do this or that, so forth and so on. And I mean, we're just going to see that snowball and get worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, that was something I knew going into this election. People were worried about, and we're starting to actually see it. We've got a case here in Georgia of a particular video. I may not get the details exactly right, but that came out of Russia that was claiming that Haitians were voting multiple times, and they had video and proof, and people were buying
Well, of
into it.
course.
And
Yeah,
it's interesting.
I've
Yeah,
heard quite a bit about that story, and I mean,
yeah.
I'm really I'm perplexed, and I don't understand. Like, it doesn't surprise me coming out of Russia. Um,
Hmm.
I'm confused at why Haitians are the targets. And I think it might
I
be
no
because of the
idea.
whole "they're eating our dogs, eating our cats" that narrative. Haitians being front and center.
Yeah.
I think that might be why, but I'm not entirely sure. Um, it's I
Well, they're probably using words and concepts that are people are kind of primed to react to.
yeah, no doubt. Like, something that I did, it was from the same vein as the Decepticon bot, which basically connected to Twitter. It read the first iteration, read the user's account and made bogus tweets on their behalf. I was working with Operation
Hmm.
Safe Escape. It's a nonprofit. They help domestic violence victims get out and stay out. So I wrote it for the purpose that
Hmm.
someone could use it, connect to the API, a free API at the time, and be able to abandon their account and just waste their abuser's time. Their abuser would see, oh, well, this account's still posting, try to interact with that account while they could either go off and not have an account or have a different account, live their best life, so forth and so on. Then I rewrote it to where it would read multiple accounts. And I think I might have actually trained it on both of your accounts at one time or another. But basically, I did it for the purpose of maintaining fake accounts. So it was like, cool.
Nice.
The next iteration of that, um, I forked the iterations, and this was just before Elon took over and started charging for the API. So that's why these tools never made it to the light of day. One was called the Intercepticon bot that was using the same the same algorithmic functions to try to identify if something was a bot or not. The other one was
Mm-hmm.
Hashy, which I used during quite a few, we'll say, national security adjacent investigations, where it would hop up to the API and it would actually pull certain, like, you could feed it a list of hashtags or a list of terms, and it would actually perform frequency analysis up to the API limit for a free API account. And then that way it gave me as an investigator really good insight into, oh, well, these are the hashtags I need to go drop into TweetDeck and look at in a 25-mile radius of this city for whatever reason. So it very well may be something along those lines where it in posts coming from the United States, or posts coming from anywhere that have X amount of engagement may have the word Haitian or Haiti or immigrant in it. And I mean, with some audiences in the U.S., the second you say immigrant, you've already pushed the button. So it doesn't matter which
Mhm.
Yeah.
city or which country, rather.
Yeah. It's interesting. This is again me on a soapbox, and this is my personal opinion, which is I don't know so much that we have a disinformation problem as we have a skepticism and critical thought problem. People just believe
So
too much without any
so when I
investigation.
lived close to the two of you, and I was teaching adjunct at a 4-year school in the area, one of the professors on their office door had a sign that said "Critical Thinking: The Other National Deficit." And honestly, I think that's the case because
Yeah.
that's something and I'll get a little soapboxy on this, but I'm not going to get too deep into it. But with modern academia, and when I say academia, I'm not even meaning colleges, I like public schools. My observation is it seems to be less about education and less about teaching and developing critical thinking skills, and more into teaching to the tests and teaching compliance and to be able to sit in a spot for 6 hours a day. And critical thinking is kind of that makes someone a problem child or disruptive if they question authority. Well, why does 2 plus 2 equal 4? Like, how does this work? If they ask that question, they are considered disruptive. So
Interesting.
I'm still very pro public schooling. Um, and I respect the hell out of the teachers and the administrators that do a tremendous amount of work for a tremendously small amount of money. But at the same time,
Yeah.
at the higher level, those developing the curriculum and the requirements, um, that's just kind of my observation, at least local to me, in what I would consider to be the case. Now, I mean, that's going to vary from one school district to another, but at the same time, in the U.S., we've got that whole pesky 10th Amendment. So you've got the school district, the state level, and then federal level. So, you've got three sets of cooks in the kitchen,
Right.
all with different motives. And, realistically, that's what it boils down to. Critical thinking is just not there. Um, I always laugh when I see the meme of a parent telling a kid, "Oh, you shouldn't believe everything you see on the internet," and then it'll be like 1998, and then it'll say 2024. You shouldn't believe everything you see on insert channel here. But I
Right.
mean, that's realistically what it is, and I'm going to make a very utopian statement here, but I think the best two things that could occur uh, for society as a whole would be the discontinuation of the 24-hour news cycle and abolishment of all social media. Because
Wow.
no, that would dry up my two best OSINT sources. So I would put myself
Sure.
out of work with that. But I think it would cut down so much on just the narratives. It would force our adversaries to have to go back to the Cold War era of how they would get their propaganda out. Because right now it's just too
Yeah.
easy. What was
Yeah,
it?
I
Yeah.
certainly see that.
About 2 years ago, I believe, Facebook inadvertently burned a U.S. intelligence unit that was running disinformation against Russia. And the reason that they did it was because they were operating in U.S. business hours. I was like,
Interesting.
rookies, come on. So, yeah. But, it's just the barrier to entry through the time that we've been having this conversation. We could have already stood up our own fake news site. We could have already written an AI bot to populate it with data. We could be pushing AI bots on various social media platforms to amplify that message. And I mean, we could already be soliciting Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies from them.
Well, what are we doing here
Jerry, why are
then?
we doing this
Yeah.
podcast?
I mean,
Yeah, what the hell?
we could already have our own NFT by now.
Jerry, we're wasting our time here. Let's go.
Shoot. So very, very interesting. It's as I listen to you discuss this, I mean, I think you all are pretty well aware that I've been fascinated with psychology and decision making, and it strikes me as what Daniel Kahneman calls the difference between system one and system two. Right, everybody operates their most of their life, living in system one, very, very intuitive, not wanting to think things through very well, and so I think the critical thinking issue is, I think it's very just endemic to humans, and I think social media, as you pointed out, is kind of that drug that just feeds us. Like we we get that dopamine hit, and I think it is just I think I don't want to call it a limitation because look at what we've accomplished as a species, but I think it has primed us to not question certain things in certain contexts. And there was a I think you probably have both seen this. There was I think it was at DerbyCon, a presentation that was talking about the effectiveness of phishing campaigns at different times of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And because people are like not all rational or not all irrational. And that was one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, when you are approaching social engineering attacks, like, is that something that you intentionally factor in because, like, there were in the past some fairly high profile attacks that resulted from people who were like checking their email, way earlier in the morning than they should have, and they clicked on a link that that set off a chain of events that they probably would not have done if they looked at it when after they had their coffee and whatnot.
Absolutely. In a professional sense, the best success I've had, aside from I'll call it the gotcha fish, and I'll share that with you in a moment, but just on like fishing across the board, I would say probably 1:30, 2 o'clock on a Friday, or a Thursday rather. You don't do Friday because some people don't come back from lunch. People are trying to avoid reading email on Friday, but you get them on Thursday, 4 days into the work week, or the day before a 3-day weekend or a holiday, um, right after lunch when they've got that carb crash coming on. That's a good time. Um, Doing it very early in the morning before coffee, that can be efficient for some people. Some people, I've done this in past lives of, if it's not during my working hours, I just don't look at my email, period. Or I'll log out of my email on my phone so that I can't. Um, So that's a risk that you have to be willing to take. But with that, if you have the right level of OSINT, and if you're looking at like when you're doing your targeting on the subjects, because I don't like to call people targets, but when you're doing your analysis for targeting on your subjects, if you see that they are active on social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, whatever, anywhere you can find them. If you see that they're very active before their perceived workday, then it may be pretty beneficial to do it. In some cases, you might want to get them late at night. It would vary based on the organization of the person. Like if I were dealing with a West Coast company that also has operations in, say, Eastern Asia, that might be a little bit tricky because it might not be anything unusual for an East Coast employee of a West Coast company that also operates in Asia to get an email at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the best thing I have to add to that would be that take the time to do the OSINT to understand what would be considered normal. And from the perspective of social engineering, whether it be physical intrusions or electronic intrusions, the more I can blend in, the better. So if they routinely get hit with 30 emails at 10 o'clock in the morning and they read them all before they do anything else, that's going to be the time to do it. Um, and I may have no way to know this. I might just have to read comments in between users. Um, but I do spend probably a little bit more time doing OSINT than some, maybe not all, but I like to have a really good understanding of the lay of the land before I even consider the attack, just to ensure that I'm able to provide them a realistic scenario of what an adversary may do. Um, I mean, some of my successful phishing campaigns that I've done in the past, chain letters, they work really well. Now that's a really good one to send directly into accounting. Those chain letters will go.
So I do have to ask. I just want to pause you there for a second. So when you have success, obviously, an organization has hired you to come in and find vulnerabilities like this, and so you send a chain email or any other scenario. What is their typical response? Like, what do they do in response to that? Is it typically training? Is it changing how their acceptable use policies? Is it like changing their controls? What do you usually see?
My recommendations are usually a little bit of everything. People who fall
Okay.
victim should have to do some level of remedial training. It should be a little bit painful, but not to the point of where they need to get a cardboard box and bring to their desk. Shouldn't go that far. Um, then the organization should conduct some analysis to determine, based on the sensitivity of their position and the type of data and resources they have access to, what other mitigation should they put in for them. And then should they make policy changes to things like the acceptable use policy? Should they be changing websites that people are allowed to access, and so on? So, there's no singular answer with that. It's very organization dependent. But on that topic, something that I know that you'll both go for with this is, I'm a big fan of meaningful metrics as it relates to social engineering. I don't care about opens. I don't care about clicks, because how can you know if an email is a phishing email if you don't open it?
Sure.
And with the clicking, I mean, yes, I would prefer a user to be able to discern, this doesn't look right, or hover over it. Oh, that's not the same thing. I would prefer that. But again, these people are professionals in another field. The singular metric that I care the most about is I call it the distance, but realistically, it's the time to report. I care how many people report it, and I care about how quickly it is reported, and then from there, things like the mean time to respond. Because at the end of the day, you should be triggering some level of incident response for every social engineering engagement. If you're using something automated, maybe not so much, but like in the past when I've administered stuff, it's like, okay, I know what's going out. I'll tell the IT team, hey, yep, it's about to happen. And then when we get emails or messages from people saying, hey, I got this, and I think it's malicious. Thanks, I'll take a look at it. And then we catalog, this is the amount of time it took them to report it. Because here's the thing. We've all worked in incident response. We all know that we can't respond to something we don't know about. And sometimes things are going to make it through our sensors. It's going to make it through our next generation advanced persistent whiz bang single pane of glass, whatever solution they're trying to sell us at the conference in San Francisco or Vegas. It's things will make it through.
Yeah.
We need to empower the users to be our eyes and ears. We need them to be the IDS. And if they report it to us, reward them, and then take the appropriate action.
There's a number of tools out there, and we're very vendor agnostic here, and we can be very brutally honest, that are supposed to help with especially email-based phishing and social engineering attacks. When you're doing your sort of work with a vendor, do you like to leave those in place to see if you can get through them, or do you try to whitelist your stuff so you get more of a pure attack surface against?
Honestly, I would try to go through them first, and because I'm not operating off of the exact TTP of an adversary,
right? Yeah, so they may not be triggered to look.
There are a few that I have detected that have caught me pretty quick. Some not so much, and it really just depends. And honestly, going back to what I said earlier, having that SPF, DKIM, and DMARC record will get me through right at half or more.
That's amazing that's how basic it is. That's really surprising. Wow. Jerry, I'm sorry. Did I interrupt one of your questions? I know you're in the middle of a thought. Okay. So we talked about training a little bit, and this is a bit of a controversial topic. Sometimes I think about phishing training, of how effective it is versus checking a box. What has been your
most experience? Of the time it's to check a box. My philosophy on it is, if I were in a position where I actually got to make that decision for an organization, I would probably try to demand something a little bit more custom, for the purpose of, we've all been told, oh, well, you need a 16 character password. You have to use a password manager. You can't use this. You can't do that for whatever reason. But, for us, we kind of understand why, because we're in that field. But, continuing to pick on HR and accounting, they don't necessarily understand that. So it may be beneficial to take something like, I was going to grab, here we go, a Raspberry Pi or a Jetson Nano, which is about the same size, and show them, based on this 9-character password and this $100 appliance, this is how quickly we're able to crack it. That's why you need to do this. And if you demonstrate that to people and give them a vested interest, and something I've heard on podcasts, as long as I've been listening to podcasts, so, coming up on 10 years, give people a way to protect their families with it so that it becomes ingrained. That's so much more than compliance. And, some organizations, they'll be like, oh, hey, we use 1Password, but you can also create personal vaults and your family can use it too. And, kudos to them for that. Because you're basically integrating security into someone's actual personal lifestyle. Because realistically, security is not a process or procedure with a defined starting and stopping point. It's more cyclic in nature of several interconnected processes and procedures. But from the human level, if you can integrate it as a lifestyle and get people used to using things like Signal or Bitwarden, 1Password, a paid VPN that is not owned by Cape Technologies that used to create spyware.
Right.
I have to throw that hatred out there. And you can have the conversation with them about why DuckDuckGo is not exactly the most secure search engine on the planet, because, their honesty has improved, but nevertheless, you can have those conversations and just dispel myths and rumors. I met a guy when I lived in Georgia. I went to a submarine veterans meetup at Perimeter Mall, and the guy's like, "Nobody will hack me." I was like, "Yeah, why is that?" I was expecting something like, "Oh, I don't use a computer." He was like, "I'm on Windows 95." I was like, "Anybody that was going to already has." And he's like, "But nobody's out there looking for it." I was like, "You don't understand. When you get targeted, it's not someone punching the keyboard looking at you. It's they're running a script, and their script is telling them the favorable ones to attack. And if you're using Windows 95, it doesn't get much more favorable than you."
Right. Though I always laugh, like when we get, some urgent vulnerability report at work and like, oh, we're so old in our technology, we're not even running the vulnerable version. We're
Right, right.
fine.
Well, I mean, that comes to one of my favorite memes from being in the Navy, right? Join the Navy. Use yesterday's technology tomorrow.
That's fair. That's fair. Uh, Jerry.
So tell us about your book. What spurred you to write it, and what should people know about it?
So the book, honestly, I had done the public speaking. I had been on podcasts. I had written blogs. Because the online school I went to was very writing intensive, I realized it was easy for me to write quite a bit of stuff in a relative short amount of time. So I pitched the book to one publisher. They weren't terribly keen on the idea as I like. They wanted to do it, but they wanted to do it a different way. Someone's like, "Hey, why don't you talk to Bill at No Starch?" So I did just that. And we started talking about it. He was very concerned with the ethical dilemmas of social engineering. The whole taking it too far or targeting personal accounts or everybody's stupid or something like that. We had a conversation about that. I wrote a sample chapter on that, and it came to life. So the book is broken down into kind of 3 sections. The beginning of it's very fundamental. We talk about principles of persuasion, a lot of rudimentary psychology, sympathy versus empathy, um, influence versus manipulation, those types of things, so that you can level the playing field with that. Then we move into some rudimentary OSINT to kind of help out with like gathering intelligence on businesses and people. And then we talk about the ethics. And then it goes into the offensive perspective, which is where we talk about here's how you actually do it. The final portion of the book is the defensive portion, where we talk about Here are some things you can do to defend against it. Here's how you can build a training and awareness program. Here are some meaningful metrics, just like the ones I discussed a little bit ago. Here's some very basic ways to produce threat intelligence on this. And then in the appendices, I actually have worksheets of this is the type of intelligence you want to gather about a business before you conduct an engagement. This is what you want to gather on a person. Here are some exercises that you can do to get better at vishing or in-person type stuff. And, like taking a technical writing class, going to Toastmasters, taking a public speaking course at a college, or my personal favorite, just walking up to random strangers and asking their password or their mom's name before they were married. I mean, this last year at B-Sides, I took Junior, and Junior walked up to seemingly strangers. They weren't strangers, but stranger enough, and said, "What's your password?" So, that kind of stuff. Like, you have to be able to keep the conversation going. And then, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention things like listening to the Jerky Boys and Roy D. Mercer and Crank Yankers. Because honestly, the difference between a prank call and a vishing call is the prank call, you're doing it for your amusement. The vishing call, you're doing it for your wallet. But you have to maintain a character.
Yeah, that is something that I don't know anyone else has ever mentioned, but I think that's a brilliant piece of advice. Go look at the prank call shows because, yeah, it's the same problem set. It's the same improvisation. It's the same psychology.
When
That's
that
brilliant. I
DJ in
love it.
Tulsa became the character of, my name is Roy D. Mercer, you knew he was going to try to extort somewhere around $100 to $600 out of them. And if they didn't want to pay up, if it was
Yeah.
a man on the phone, he was going to come down. And if it was a woman, Sharon Jean was going to come down. That's just the story. That's that. I just summed up every single Roy D. Mercer call, but that's basically what it is. And then he would make some of the most far-fetched claims, and it's like being able to do that with a straight face. There was a time
Yeah.
I went into a barber shop, and the person cutting my hair was like knew what I was up to. They knew like what I did professionally, but the receptionist was really gullible and didn't believe that. So after I got my hair cut, we went outside. My barber was smoking a cigarette. I was vaping, and I used a spoofing technology on my phone, and I called the barber shop and like was like, "Hey, I'm with such and such charity. I need to make 35 appointments." They're like, 35 appointments for uh, excuse me? I'm like, "I've got 35 kids that I need to bring in for a haircut." And they were confused, and obviously I could look in the window and I saw like how confused this poor girl was. And I was
Mhm.
like, "Is it a problem if they have head lice or ringworm?" And like I just started going like off the walls with it, but it really wasn't any different, and I just kept going and going and going. I was like, can we get a volume discount on this? You charge $12 for a haircut. The best I can do is 9 a person. How's that? Can you provide like peanut butter sandwiches or crackers for the kids while you're cutting their hair? And do you
Mhm.
have any friends that cut toenails you could bring in to help out too? Just it was some of the most far fetched stuff. But the thing is, and this is what really tripped my barber up, I was doing it with a straight face.
Did you make the
She
poor
didn't
girl
cry,
cry?
but I would say she probably had copious alcohol consumption after work. That would be my
And
assumption.
this is the story of why Joe had to find a new barber.
Yep,
Right.
yep, yep. Well, no, that is the story of why
So
my barber moved from working at that shop to a different shop. But I mean, that's the kind of stuff, like as a teenager, I thought it was funny,
yeah.
and this is really dumb, but I thought it was funny to call Subway restaurants and ask them how much a ticket to New York was. And then when they'd be like, "Sir, this is a sandwich shop," I'd be like, "Well, you need to be more descriptive in your entry in the phone book." Yeah.
You're not
Or
wrong.
or or here's the
It's pretty
really good
clear.
one. We've all been in middle school where we've been boys before. We found out my seventh grade science teacher's phone number, the last 4 digits spelled fart.
Oh no.
Oh, dear.
That was the summer that we learned that if you tinkered with the audio jacks on the back of a modem, you could play sounds from your sound card directly into the modem. And we discovered farts.com, and they had this thing of July is National Baked Beans Month. And we called her every day for the entire summer and played it without the microphone plugged up, so we could just stand there and hee haw about it. And she's losing her mind. And then at the very end, you'd hear, "Who is this?" And it's not unlike the rest of hacking, right? Like the whole mischief of the hacking world. Like I just wanted to see what I could get away with. A lot of times people do things for the amusement of others. Sometimes they do it for their own amusement. Prank calling oftentimes is for my amusement, but it is a very, very valuable training tool as well. If done properly, you can get in trouble for it. Like don't go prank calling like federal agencies and law enforcement and hospitals and stuff. There is a case study in the book about prank calling hospitals and posing as the Queen. The Australian DJs that did that.
Oh, yes,
Right.
that's right.
That is a case study in the book, as are the coal fire pin testers as well.
Right.
So,
Yep.
Who got arrested?
They
for
what they believe to be an engagement on the up and up.
Yeah, they were paid, engaged, signed contracts, signed SOW, and got arrested while they were in the process.
And from what I hear,
doing it,
they are still struggling from that. Like how many years later?
That sucks.
So
Wow.
yeah, it's wild, but all those things are kind of important. You have to take all that into consideration. Like I'm not a big fan of reading legal journals and legal opinions. If I want to know something from the legal perspective, I'll be like, "Hey, lawyer Liz, hey, help me out here." And like,
hey, we had her on the show recently
there you
too.
go.
So
it's like hypothetically, if I need to understand from something from the legal perspective, or I could just go to Chat GPT. I have to say that tongue in cheek. But to that end, in our field, especially with social engineering, if you're sneaking into places, yes. There was a time that I did a physical engagement, and instead of doing the whole putting a rubber chicken or a rubber duck in the server room and taking a picture of it, they wanted me to actually grab inventory and try to make it out the door with it. It was that day I learned that those nice guys that worked in HR that were, checking me in, they have concealed carry permits. They use them. and I will tell you, looking at that end of a Glock was not very exciting.
Yeah, probably not what you planned for.
And then I went back to work, and the sales guy's like, "Oh, how'd it go?" I just kind of stayed quiet, went in my office, saw him and the owner in the break room together, and then I was like, "Now's a good time to tell him about it." Yeah, he played in a band with my vice president. He got promoted. So shortly thereafter, I went to greener, bluer pastures.
Indeed. We're kind of dancing around something that I did want to talk about, which is the ethics of this. And, kind of what your view is around this is very powerful stuff if used for evil. How do you balance the ethics with the practicality and the usefulness of understanding?
You have to acknowledge that the adversaries, the criminals, the bad guys, whatever you want to call them, they're not going to follow the rules. They're going to do things that I won't. But to that end, a few things that, like a few hard lines in the sand that I would draw. I will not target someone's personal account. I will not try to fish your personal email. I will not try to interact with you on your personal social media. If you're like LinkedIn, that one's a little bit murky. If you're schlepping company stuff, I kind of consider that fair game. Unless your company's acceptable use policy or bring your own device policy has a caveat saying that I can call your personal phone, I'm not calling your personal phone. If you have a VoIP number that rings into your personal phone, I'll do that. But your personal phone, your personal device, that is your place of sanctity. I don't want to take away from that. Now, using your personal social medias, your personal emails, or whatever else to gain intelligence on the OSINT side, that's fair game all day, every day. I'm going to do it. If I come across data breach information, I'm not going to tell, I will say these users need to change their passwords, or these passwords should not be allowed. I'm not going to say that this email address has this password. I understand that somebody who wants to be abusive can still figure it out, but I did not wrap it up with a bow and hand it to them. I'm making them jump through hoops so that if the person being abused decides to lawyer up on them, that would make it in such a way that it would force the abuser to prove that they went through all these additional steps of enrichment to do that. So it's not like, oh, well, I just got this from this attacker that we paid. No. And, even for like the attack surface monitoring stuff, like I'm not going to bring in somebody's personal problems with that, because it is, and on the phone, it is so easy to go too far. In the book, I talk about, I was doing an engagement, and I asked a woman her password, and I heard sniffles. She said buttermilk. And I shared a story about how I used to eat crumpled up cornbread in buttermilk with my grandfather. Her husband had died a couple years prior, and that was his favorite food as well. So I didn't break character, but I stopped trying to get more intelligence. And actually, I just sat, chatted, had a conversation, and I made sure that she was emotionally in the right space before I disconnected the call.
That's good. Which a bad
correct.
Guy would.
They would have just ran it harder and harder and harder and harder. But again, for the people who say, "Oh well, we should do everything the criminals do," it's like, okay, show me a pen test statement of work that authorizes ransomware. I'm not talking about controlled ransomware. I'm talking like legit ransomware. Show me a legit statement of work that authorizes ransomware to test and see if your company will even pay. Show me that.
Yeah.
Show me a statement of work that authorizes a DDoS. And if they can't provide those two things, then my solution to that is, in the words of Roy D. Mercer, bull butter. It's really, that's what it is. Because the reality is we don't have to do everything that the criminals do. We have a way to test things and understand what the severity of something is. We have ways to test how susceptible an organization is for something without going all the way. Going back to the discussion we were having before we went on the air, you don't like it with firearms training. You don't always have to fire live ammunition. You can do the laser dry fire systems. You can do the simulators. You should practice like you play, but you don't want to play at 1,000% all the time. That's the reason we don't see Krav Maga competitions.
Right.
That's a good point.
I mean, very off topic, but I teach people, beginners to shoot. And one of the things I like to do is in a clean room with no live ammo outside of a range environment, introduce them to all the mechanical controls and safe handling of a weapon with no live fire anywhere in the area, because that's very intimidating to a new
100%.
shooter. And so I try to give them all the familiarity to because that's sensory overload to somebody. Anyway, this is way off topic.
Well, I mean,
but
is it? Because at the same time, the amount of how hyper connected we are, whether it be social media, if you're talking like micro targeting, or you're talking, some of the precision with like advertising to get things in the right place in front of the right people, even though it's not the right people, the correct people. With that, is it really different? Because you have the sensory overload there. If you have a sophisticated adversary, they're going to be targeting you with ads on social media. They're going to be in your inbox with a variety of different things. They're going to be texting you. They may be calling you. They may even be behind you in line at Costco. So,
Yeah.
the sensory overload, it's real. I mean, it's a little bit different because we're not having to uh dodge, dip, dive, duck, and dodge bullets, but at the same time, you know, we are doing that with digital ammunition. So the parallel
Yeah.
is there. Um, you know, you fortunately we do have the control as to whether we hear loud noises and gunfire most of the time, but at the same time, there are those other emotional triggers that will set things off in what I consider lizard brain, right? That'll get
Hmm.
down into that fight or flight.
So, as we start to wrap up, because we want to be respectful of your time, this has been amazing. Um, what do you think the biggest takeaway is from most companies and most situations that's sort of like low hanging fruit that they could do better about social engineering defense?
Set up a policy, um, and with the policy, be very precise in what you want people to do. Tell them what you want them to do. Don't leave them to guess, because people will make a best effort guess, but still make the wrong decision. So some things I've done in the past that I've seen to work. Oftentimes we've all read the incident response plan or procedures for users that
Hmm.
says, "Hey, if you click on something, notify security." Right? I did that. I did that once, and I had
Right.
HR email all the people that I worked with and said, "Hey, this is a cyber exercise. Please contact security." You know who they called? The gate guard. So that told me that in the next iteration of the document, I needed to
Mm.
say contact cyber or information security at this extension, as opposed to contact security. So tell them
Yeah.
explicitly who to contact, how to contact them. Do you want them to call? Do you want them to walk over? Do you want them to email? Do you want them to send carrier pigeons, Morse code, smoke signals? Do you have a hotline number on Signal or WhatsApp that's out of band? Make that decision ahead of time and communicate that precisely with the users. Another thing, like if I had someone that clicked a link, this was in a DoD environment, and they're really, really, really picky about what color their networking cables are, because that usually dictates a security clearance thing. Everything on the
Sure.
contract I was working on was unclassified, so I didn't care what color. I did a little bit of research with like the color spectrum in terms of understanding what had the most contrast, because we had a few people that were severely colorblind, and I worked with them to figure out what color stuck out the best. So all of our network cables were yellow, and anyone who's worked in the DoD knows, but we were purely unclassified, so it didn't really matter. But what I did is
Hmm.
I got zip ties, and I went and I bought some cheap scissors, and I zip tied it to the networking cable. So I told people, if you click on something, we were a Windows shop, lock your screen, and then if you feel comfortable, unplug the network cable. If you don't, just cut it. We have more. There's not enough voltage going through there that's going to make you look like Marv from Home Alone.
Right.
Just cut it, because that way, this was circa 2013 to 2016. What was running wild? I didn't want to worry about the spread, and ransomware cannot spread
Right.
if it is not on a network.
That's true. Did anybody
Yeah,
ever cut a cable?
and it's fun.
Nice.
The best part of it
That's
is
awesome.
her husband was the guy who ran the cable factory and had to replace it. So, but you know what? At the same time, that's one of those things that I am totally on board with. I told the users, this is what I want you to do. Anyone who's been in the military probably can remember the bomb threat worksheets that were next to every single phone. When is it going to go off? What is going to trigger
Mm.
it? Why are you doing it? Who are you? Blah, blah, blah. And you would have a grease pencil and you would just fill it out. I put those next to everybody's computers as well. It was the fish threat worksheet. So, what's the subject of the
Nice.
email? When did you see it? What did you do? Who did you tell? And all of that. So then that way they didn't have to try to recount it like 4 hours later and get things wrong. They were able to like pick it up and like go through the checklist. So then that way I was able to direct employees to do exactly what we wanted them to do without having to guess they knew they were doing the right thing. They knew they weren't going to get in trouble. And I knew that I was going to have enough context going in that I could adequately respond to the incident. And if more companies would do something kind of similar and take the time to do it, and, once a year checkbox training is not enough. You should have training.
Mm-hmm.
I say quarterly, and I say that some of your roles should have it more frequently than that. And the training should be role specific, because the executives have different concerns and different issues than, say, security, than acquisitions, than procurement, than accounting, than HR, than engineering or operations. And some of the executives have executive assistants that would be the front line. You should have those. You should have situational training relevant specifically to their role, with things that they face that someone else would not have to face.
Yeah, makes sense. It makes sense. Well, hey, how can people find more about your work if they wanted to get in touch or get your book? Or
the easiest way to
learn
find my book, it's on Amazon, but you can also get it on nostarch.com. If you purchase it on No Starch, if you buy the physical copy, you immediately get a digital copy on the spot. So you have that.
Nice.
Every now and then it is included in Humble bundles as well. I'm probably easiest to find these days on LinkedIn. I'm not really on, I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky and Mastodon and all those places, but I'm not very active on them. I'm probably most active on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find because I've got eyeball emoji before my name. That's a tripwire I have to catch people messaging me with automation. I also have
Nice.
the words Tiananmen Square in both English and Mandarin there to get blocked on that firewall. And I've got an entire honeypot around my LinkedIn.
Oh
But
my.
if you want to connect on LinkedIn, let me know that you're coming from the show as opposed to just sending the request without any context, because I do get a pretty nice volume of sales pitches. Even though I'm not open to cold sales pitches, I get a lot of really cold sales pitches. I've not got any meeting
Same.
invites lately, though. So I saw
Those are
that
the
on LinkedIn
worst.
today, and then I saw somebody name and shame the company. I was like, I've applied for some jobs there, and they're not even nice enough to tell me no. So I guess I'm just gonna stop applying there. But thanks there, buddies.
I think I saw the same LinkedIn post about a certain well-known company in the EDR space with unsolicited
Yep.
meeting invites.
Oh
Something
my.
to the
Oh
effect
my.
of aren't I think an airline's trying to smack them around to the tune of, what is it, billions?
Currently, at least 500 million, maybe more.
Goodness. That's exciting.
Mm.
Anyway, Joe, this has been great. Thank you so much. Any last thoughts to leave our hopefully more than 5 listeners with? As we wrap
Hey,
up here?
thanks for having me. I've been able to achieve success in this field because I've stood on the shoulders of giants. I realize now that I've been in this industry for 15 years, and it's time to start letting people stand on my shoulders. So if I can be of any assistance, please reach out. Sometimes I have more bandwidth than others, but anything I can do to help, I greatly appreciate. Of course, I have my OSINT training through the Oscension that I have. You can find the on-demand stuff at academy.theoscension.com, or just message me. I can send you links. There'll be legit links. Trust me. Unless you're paying me beforehand, I'm not going to fish you. It's all good. And I also make it a practice of never fishing under my real name, because I need people to trust my name. And I want to say thank you to both of you, because at one time or another, your shoulders have been the giants' shoulders of which I've stood on. Um, that list
That's
could
very
go on
kind.
and on and on and on, but you two specifically as well. I learned a lot whenever I was blossoming, and I had a long commute and stayed up to speed on all the podcasts back when I was living outside the perimeter down there. Y'all kept me a lot of company. But my parting wisdom is, things are going to change. What is correct today may not be correct tomorrow. Stay investigative. feel free to look things up. And curiosity is probably your biggest strength in this field.
Nice.
Wise words.
That's amazing.
Well, thank you, Joe.
All right.
Thanks again for having me.
Yeah. All right. Well, that wraps up our show for today. Amazing guest, Joe. Thank you. We'll put all these things in the show notes and drop that out. And if you like the show, tell a friend. If you don't like the show, maybe tell you're not friends.
Yeah. Tell somebody else.
And, we're trying to get the show off the ground. It's a new format for us. We're still kind of getting our legs, but give us some feedback. We'd love to hear it. Whatever format you want to set it in. We'll be on all the podcasts places, YouTube, all that good stuff, or email us. You can find us on various social media. You can find on Twitter, formerly Twitter, now X, at Lerg, L-E-R-G. On Jerry's very awesome Mastodon service, infosec.exchange, at Lerg, L-E-R-G. Where can they find you, Mr. Bell?
I'm mostly on Mastodon at Jerry at infosec.exchange.
Excellent. And with that, thank you, everyone. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Take care.
Bye-bye.